Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 20 favorite episodes of The Simpsons. In this video I will count down my 20 favorite episodes of The Simpsons. So The Simpsons isn't a show that I cover very much on my channel, as I typically don't do comedies, but The Simpsons is one of my all-time favorite comedies. That I absolutely love this show. In fact, it might even go as far as to say it's one of my favorite TV shows of all time. I think the comedy is pure gold and it's absolutely classic. I used to watch this every day after I got home from work. However, that being said, I'm only really looking at The Simpsons up to season 9, or at least well, it aired in the 90s, because I do believe it's still going now. It's like on season 30 or whatever, and it's totally unwatchable in my opinion. It's just like a pale shadow of what it used to be, and they really should have ended the show a long time ago. So I've been wanting to put out this top 20 video for quite some time, but I've just been pushing it off. But then recently I've seen a couple other top 10 videos, so I thought I'd give my take on it, because everyone has their different opinions, different takes on which episodes they like and prefer, so I thought I'd put mine out there. But pretty much every top 10 or top 20 I've seen also it sticks with the early years of The Simpsons, usually the 90s era, but I've seen some differing opinions on when the show stopped being good. Some people say that it stopped being good after season 7, which I totally disagree with, because I actually really enjoyed season 8 and 9, or actually some of my favorite seasons, so you'll see some episodes from those seasons on this top 20, but not past season 9. Season 10 for me was the first bad season, and then each season after that just kept getting progressively worse. So mainly I'm just looking at that seasons 2 through 9, because season 1 was throwaway as well. Anyway, enough preamble. Let me get into my top 20 favorite episodes of The Simpsons, starting with my number 20, The Twisted World of Marge Simpson. This is the episode where Marge starts selling pretzels, but of course what is this episode really known for, and why it's in my top 20, is the ending where there's a mafia war going outside the Simpsons' home, where Fat Tony and are fighting the accuser, because Homer had enlisted Fat Tony to help Marge, but then the other women, not to be outdone, enlisted the accuser of the Japanese mafia, so they're fighting outside the war, and Bart's like, what's going on? And Homer's like, oh, just go back to sleep, it's just a mild war. Hilarious stuff. Anyway, moving on to my number 19, which is Bart versus Australia. This is the first and the best episode where the Simpsons go and visit another country, and they talk about different aspects of the country. This episode made comparisons to the Singapore incident in the 90s, but put the Australian twist to it, which made it hilarious. I particularly have a fondness from it, living in New Zealand. New Zealanders love this episode a lot. Australians in general, some of them are a bit offended by this episode, but New Zealanders love nothing more than to make fun of Australians, and plus we feel it connects with us a bit more, because it's a bit more relevant because we're so close to Australia. But anyway, I'll move on to my number 18, which is a Treehouse of Horrors 5. So there's a lot of Treehouse of Horrors. This is the one where they start out with the Shining parody, and then they have the one where Homer's traveling back in time, and every time he makes a mistake, it alters the future, and then it ends with a segment about like the teachers at the school like starting to kill and eat the children. This was pretty good. The first two segments were amazing. I love this weird science fiction stuff with the time travel. Is really interesting, and I love the theme they have with groundskeeper Willie trying to run up and save the day, and always getting stabbed and killed and end up doing nothing, which was a commentary on the character in The Shining, who did the same thing. They made a big deal about him coming to save the day, but he just got killed, so what was the point of him? And I love how they actually went that beyond the Shining parody segment and had groundskeeper Will in each of the 3 segments. It was great. Anyway, I'll move on to my number 17, which is Lisa on Ice. This is the episode where Lisa and Bart join a hockey league, and they end up competing with each other, which is pretty hilarious. However, this episode has 2 of my favorite gags of all time. There's the Monster Island gag, where someone says to Lisa, oh, don't worry about Monster Island, that's just a name, but then she ends up there and she's running away from these giant monsters. She's like, I thought you said it was just a name, and the guy was like, well, actually it's a peninsula. classic joke. And then, of course, the other joke where Marge is trying to calm Bart and Lisa down when they're fighting with each other and saying you're not in direct competition with each other. And then Homer comes in and says, oh, guess what? Your teams are playing each other. You're in direct competition. And fight, 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 fight. Absolutely, I could almost died laughing at that. Anyway, we move on to my number 16, which is The City of New York versus Homer. This is another season 9 episode that I absolutely love, where Homer goes to New York City and he absolutely hates it and he has a horrible time. He ends up drinking crab juice because he doesn't want to drink Mountain Dew, and he has to go to the top of the World Trade Center to have to pee, and he's in the wrong tower, so he has to go to the other one. Absolutely hilarious. And while Homer is having this absolutely horrid time, his family's loving New York, going to see Broadway. We get a couple of funny musicals and stuff like that. It was a great contrast. Love this episode. Anyway, we move on to my number 15, which is Homer at Bat. This is the episode where they had a whole bunch of baseball stars come and guest star. But unlike a lot of the later, especially the later seasons where they just had guest stars just for the sake of it, and it actually comes off as kind of hokey and dumb, they actually made a point to write a really great and funny episode for these guest stars, because me, I'm not a baseball fan, so I could not give two craps about these stars, but it's the fact that they managed to write such a funny episode from them and give them all these character traits. One of my favorite gags, again, is in this episode where Mr. Burns hires a hypnotist to hypnotize his baseball players to play better, but he ends up like making one of them go insane, think he's a chicken, so Mr. Burns is upset, saying, I'm going to report you, and the hypnotist then hypnotizes Mr. Burns and said, no, I did a good job, a very good job. Absolutely hilarious, and there's a lot of other funny jokes, gags like this, just one after the other, really work. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 14, which is Elisa's Wedding. This is one the first, I think, episode where they like had a glimpse of the Simpsons' future while they're grown up, which of course never happened in real life because they're still kids 30 years later. But anyway, they had these episodes where they give us a glimpse of what they'd be like as adults. This is when Lisa marries this really posh British man because she gets along with him because she's very intellectual, but then she takes him home to her family and they're a bunch of idiots and she's really embarrassed by them, and sort of countering her love for her family with the other, and ends up losing this guy, but she thinks it's worth it because she prefers her family. And there's a lot of hilarious jokes in between. And I think this episode was set in like 2017 or something, or some year that we passed. I could be wrong about that, but it was interesting getting the Simpsons take on as a futuristic. I love the fake out how they show a whole bunch of robots walking down the street, but then you find out it's just auditions for the Wizard of Oz play where they're playing the Tin Man. Hilarious. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 13, Bart Gets Hit by a Car. It's season 2 episode, probably the first good episode in my opinion. Where we're introduced to Lionel Hutz. We get a lot of absolutely amazing Lionel Hutz jokes. I think this is the best episode for Lionel Hutz when he's in court and being a buffoon, and it's absolutely hilarious how they try to scandal Bart when he wasn't really hit that badly by Mr. Burns, but they try to milk him for money because Mr. Burns is a total dick about it. But one of my, again, favorite gags in this episode is when Mr. Hutz was talking to Bart, and he was like, could you imagine a world without lawyers? And they have this thought bubble come up, and there's a bunch of people singing and dancing with a happy smile and going, la 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 la, and Lionel Hutz shudders. Ooh. Hilarious. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 12, Treehouse of Horror 7. This is my favorite Treehouse of Horror. This is the one where the first segment I think is kind of throwaway again, and it's probably why this episode didn't rank higher, was with Bart having this twin that they keep up in the attic, and they feed fish heads, and they found out that actually Bart was the evil twin and not the other one. I don't know, that was a bit throwaway. But the next two segments are great. We had another great science fiction segment where Lisa has a science experiment with like tooth and coke, and it ends up like creating a mini universe, and then the mini universe ends up like bringing her inside the universe. It was absolutely so absurd. It was hilarious. But the best part of this Treehouse of Horror is the third segment, which was one of my favorite segments of all time, is with when Homer and, the space aliens, Kodos and King, kidnap they want to impersonate the Earth leaders, so they go to America and they want to sit there, take me to your leader, and it's like, oh, that's President Clinton, but wait, there's an election, Bob Dole is running against them, so it could be Bob Dole, so they impersonate both Clinton and Bob Dole, and it's absolutely an amazing commentary on the two-party system, which I could not agree with more. It was so hilarious when they're having debates. He's like, either way, your planet is doomed, doomed. And I love at the end when they find out that they are space aliens, and someone's like, well, I'm going to vote for a third-party candidate. And King's like, go away, go ahead, throw your vote away. It's one of the classic lines in The Simpsons. It's absolutely hilarious. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 11, which is 22 short films about Springfield. This one used to be a lot higher on my list, but I watched this recently and I realized there's only a couple segments, because it has, as the title suggests, there's a lot of short segments about Springfield, and I think there's a really interesting concept overall, but there's only a couple of segments in here which I think are absolutely hilarious. Some of them, like the Cletus one and Lisa getting bubblegum in her hair, kind of throwaway, but the one with the Pulp Fiction parody was actually quite funny. But the best one had the one I quoted to on no end, because it's absolutely hilarious, is the one with Principal Skinner and Chalmers. I always love the interaction between Skinner and Chalmers, but this one segment is at its highest, is by far the best of it, where they take it to such an absurdity, where Skinner just says outright lies and excuses, and Chalmers like acting like he's onto it, and then he ends up believing it. Like when this house is on fire and Skinner's like, oh, it's just the Aurora Borealis. He's like, the Aurora Borealis, this time of the year, and this part of the country, localized entirely in your kitchen. Yes. May I see it? No. Absolutely hilarious. One of the most quotable lines in The Simpsons, in my opinion. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 10, which is Lisa the Vegetarian. I always related to this episode because I was a vegetarian when I first saw it, and it does make a lot of really poignant comedy about vegetarianism, but also about how letting people do what they want. If people want to eat meat, that's fine. If people want to be vegetarian, that's fine, and it's about live and let live, and it does this message very well, but in a typical hilarious Simpsons way. And this is another episode where there's just one funny joke after another. Of course, the whole thing where Lisa sabotages Homer's barbecue and Marge yells, Bart! And he's like, what? Oh, sorry, forced it to happen. And then she knocks the pig and it goes flying, and then you see Mr. Burns, and Spindler's Mr. Burns is like, oh, I'm going to donate whole thousands of money to charity. Haha, when pigs fly, and then the pig flies past. Absolutely hilarious. A lot of gags like this. A great episode. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 9, Trash of the Titans, a season 9 episode. I love season 9. Anyway, this episode was great, where Homer gets in a feud with the garbage men, and they refuse to service the house anymore, so the house becomes a junkyard, and Marge is like pressuring him, please just apologize, and then Homer's like, no, I don't apologize, I'm sorry, that's just how I am. And then of course Homer ends up running for the waste management, whatever they call it, commissioner or whatever, and it's this guy Ray Patterson, voiced by Steve Martin. Their interactions are absolutely hilarious, and again another great political commentary about how he was like, oh, I'm a trusted public servant who knows what he's doing, you're gonna vote for me, you're gonna vote for this idiot who's making a lot of promises that you can't keep. And then Homer wins in a landslide. Absolutely great commentary. And then, of course, it's absolutely hilarious when Homer completely fucks it up and the whole town is overrun by garbage, and they hire the guy back. They're like, yeah, you're back. He's like, I am so gratified to see you wallow in the mess that you made. You're all screwed. Goodbye. And walks off. Hilarious. One of my favorite moments. Anyway, we'll move over to my number 8, which is Who Shot Mr. Burns. Now, it's not the gimmick of this episode that I love. In fact, the gimmick, it was kind of throwaway, and it made me not think well of this episode until I went back and rewatched and realized this is another sort of like Homer at Bat, where the writers brought their A game. They just brought it. Like, there was one funny joke after another. It was just hit with funny joke, funny joke, funny joke. It was just everything gelled together just to have like a hilarious 2 hours. There were some particularly good gags, such as the Dr. Colossus, because when Smithers was talking about how, oh, Mr. Burns crossed the line from normal villain to cartoon villainy, and then they showed this like cartoon villain in jail cell. It's like, ha! He was a rank amateur compared to Dr. Colossus! Ha ha ha! And just jokes like that really worked. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 7, which is A Star is Burns. This is the film festival episode that had the critic, voiced by John Lovix, who had his own show at the time, only ran for 2 seasons. It was a show I cared for. But that's actually not why I love this episode. The episode for itself just works with the particular film festival and all the jokes that they had, like the guy getting hit by a football in the groin, and Homer loved it and wanted to vote for it, and they were trying to convince him, no, go for this arty film, where Mr. Burns was trying to pay off the other people to vote for his shameless film. And of course this has a classic line I heard quoted a lot of times about the boo-orns, because people were shouting boo at Mr. Burns' crappy film, and people were like, are you, and Smithers said, oh, they're not saying boo, they're saying boo-orns. And then Mr. Burns asked him, I was like, oh, are you saying boo or boo-orns? And everyone yells boo, but then they have a handsome old man saying, oh, I was saying boo-orns. Absolutely classic. And then, of course, at the end of the episode, they had to go to the actual Oscars, and Mr. Burns tries to run, but tries to win by pay off everyone off, but he loses to George C. Scott in the film guy getting hit in the groin by the football. And, you know, if you George C. Scott is a well-known actor who was in The Exorcist and other movies. It was so hilarious. It showed it go, my groin. Anyway, we'll move on to number 6, which is the Cartridge Family, another season 9 episode. This is the episode where Homer gets a gun, and I absolutely love this episode. I think it's another episode that just had funny joke after funny joke. The whole premise was hilarious for Homer. You know, they don't feel safe, so Homer goes out and buy a gun. He's a typical idiot and misuses it, and he uses it to turn on the TV. Lisa asks him to get the basketball from the roof down, so he just shoots it into Flate, and he's like, oh, do you want me to get the cat down as well? And Lisa's like, no, that's okay. And also, like, when he first bought the gun, it was absolutely hilarious when he's like, Marge, I have a real surprise for you, close your eyes. So she closes her eyes, opens her eyes to see Homer pointing a gun out of her head. Absolutely hilarious. And then the episode, and then there's other gags like the Sleep Easy Hotel, which, you know, it was missing letters, so it said Sleazy Hotel. Absolutely hilarious. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 5, which is I Love Lisa, another very classic episode. This one's from season 4, where it has Ralph Wiggum gets a crush on Lisa, which is unrequited, and so she tries to let him down gently, but uses, when he offers to take her to the Krusty festival that everyone wanted to go to, so she uses him to do it. But whilst they're at the thing, Krusty interviews him, and Ralph is saying, this is my girlfriend, but then Lisa freaks out and is like, I don't even like you. And then another classic thing I've seen quoted a lot, and Bart was watching the tape of it, and he was just replaying it. It's like, look, you can actually pinpoint the exact moment in his heartbreak. And a lot of other like funny gags with Chief Wiggum acting like an idiot. That is like really when I choose you, another classic thing. Anyway, we'll move on to my number 4, which is Cape Fear. Now, I typically don't like Sideshow Bob episodes, or Krusty episodes for that matter. You notice there are no Krusty episodes on this list, including this one, because this isn't a Krusty episode. But it's Sideshow Bob, who I also typically don't care for. But I did really enjoy this episode. It was an absolutely amazing parody of Cape Fear. They perfectly parodied like the moments where he's writing in blood, but then he faints because he's like writing his diary in blood. And when he runs out of prison, goes right towards the camera, he slams into the camera, and hiding under the car, and then Homer's like running through Cactus Patch and whatever, and all this stuff. And all the rape gag, I think they just got carried away with that. Yeah, and also, of course, in the movie theater when he's smoking the cigar and laughing loud, and Homer is actually smoking a bigger cigar and laughing even louder. Anyway, it was just totally on point, not just with his Cape Fear parodies, but just one joke after another. Again, this is another episode that just gelled, where every joke was just hilarious all the way throughout the show. I mean, it would take me forever if I tried to recap all my favorite moments, because there's so many. Anyway, let me get to my number 3, which is Homer the Vigilante. This is an underrated episode in my opinion, because I don't really see it in many top 10 lists. And to me, this is one of the funniest episodes ever, where there's a cat burglar who ends up stealing a lot of stuff. So Homer gets together this vigilante group, and they end up like harassing people instead of actually doing anything to fight the actual criminal. And there's a lot of absolutely hilarious moments. This is another episode for me. It was just totally on point to, Abraham Simpson bragging about how he got rid of the Irish, and they showed this like leprechaun looking guy saying, "Oh, and a very good job you did of it too," and just like a lot of quick jokes, just rapid fire in there. That's just absolutely really worked, and they're really amazing. And of course the ending where the guy's like, "Oh, it's hidden under a giant T," and they go out and absolutely everything, a double T, and absolutely everything has, big T, I think. Absolutely everything has a big T, like the theater has a giant T, and there's like a giant teacup. I have to run in like, be more specific. Absolutely hilarious. Anyway, I'll move on to my number 2 favorite episode of The Simpsons, which is Marge versus the Monorail. Got to love the Monorail. Ever since I first saw this when I was really young, when I was a teenager, I remember seeing this gag, and I remember it as the funniest gag I've ever seen in any show, where Mr. Burns tries to hide this like nuclear waste in the tree, and the tree like is like glowing, and it's like tentacles going, and like a squirrel comes out of the tree and like he shoots the laser beams from its eyes to get an acorn to eat. Absolutely thought that was hilarious, and I couldn't actually pinpoint which episode that was. I just remembered that, and I went back and watched it. I was like, oh, it's the Monorail episode. I should have known, because the rest of the episode is absolutely amazing. Again, one great joke after another all around. You have Phil Hartman playing the voice of this swindler who comes in and does the monorail, and the whole thing about Homer operating the monorail when he has absolutely no idea what he's doing. It's just another episode where everything just gelled to work. Anyway, we'll get to my number 1 favorite episode of The Simpsons, and that is You Only Move Twice. I had to put this as my number 1. This is a season 8 episode, so people who think season 8 was no good, I have to sorely disagree. So this is the episode where Homer gets offered a nice job at this cushy, like 90s, modern for the 90s anyway, company that's totally different than Mr. Burns. The boss is nice, the people are nice, the town they live in is pristine, and it's a really amazing job. And then Homer, and then the family, Bart, Marge, and Lisa, actually hate living there for all various reasons. Lisa's allergic to everything, Marge has nothing to do, and Bart gets shunted back into a remedial class because he's not enough to keep up with the other kids in that town. So they're all having a horrible time, where Homer is like this boss. He makes enough money to buy stuff he likes, everyone treats him well, his boss is friendly. It's like a dream for him, but he has to reconcile that. Okay, I'm skipping over the elephant in the room. Let me get to the point of what makes this episode the best. But through that storyline, you find out that Homer's boss is actually a James Bond supervillain. And it's absolutely hilarious. And what makes the comedy in this episode work so well is that they don't acknowledge it. They never acknowledge it. None of the characters, Homer, Marge, no one ever acknowledges that his boss is a Bond villain. And it's absolutely hilarious, just the obtuseness of it, and how they like slowly, like, because you don't realize this at first, because at first it just seems like a normal town. And I kind of think maybe the writers kind of just thought it up as they were writing halfway through, but I don't begrudge them for that, because I think it works so beautifully how they just slowly, and you see like hints of this Bond villain, and it just gets worse and worse to the point where there's like the government agents storming the thing trying to kill everyone, and Hank Scorpio is like with the flamethrower going, ah! throwing it to you, and Homer's still oblivious to this and going, oh, the government. And Homer actually kills James Bond in that episode because, you know, they do, Hank Scorpio does like the stereotypical obscure James Bond, you know, I'm going to kill you with a laser beam, whatever, and James Bond, of course, manages to escape, but then Homer walks up and just punches him, so the guys with guns and just come over and shoot him. Hilarious. And then the ending song they have is like a typical James Bond type, you know, song that they have in Scorpio, but the lyrics of the song are hilarious because it has to do like with 401ks and just treating him like he's a ordinary boss, but really he's this villain. And he ends up like taking over the East Coast, and he's like, oh, drop me a line if you're ever on the East Coast. I'm sorry, this was The Simpsons at its best. It was always my favorite episode. I think there's no better comedy than this. I'm not even that huge of a James Bond fan, but it's less of the fact that it's a James Bond parody, more the fact of the way they executed it, the way that they slowly introduced it and had the main characters be so oblivious to it. It just made the comedy work so well. So this is always my favorite episode of The Simpsons. You only move twice. Anyway, so that is it for my top 20 favorite episodes of The Simpsons. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can check out my channel as I do many more videos and other shows, including shows like Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Star Trek, Babylon 5, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.